Delighted to be here today with the wonderful Nicole Taylor, award-winning screenwriter for TV and film. Her 3-part BBC series, Three Girls, earned her a Best Writer BAFTA, and she won huge acclaim for her film Wild Rose. Most recently, Nicole adapted David Nicholls' modern classic, One Day. As most of you will know, it follows the story of a couple who meet every year on the same day, tracking their lives as they fall in and out of love. Nicole made it into a 14-part series. The series was watched over 9 million times in its first week and won huge critical acclaim. The Guardian called it a flawless rom-com, while The Times went for exquisite. And when those two publications agree, you know you've achieved something monumental. So everyone, welcome to Nicole Taylor. So you started your career as a miserable solicitor. Your words, not mine. How did you move into writing scripts? What brought about this change of direction in your career?
Very slowly, at a real glacial pace. I was always interested in writing, and I just didn't know that it was a career that you could do on television or for film. And from my background, sort of Jewish, Glaswegian, suburban background, if you were good at science, great, well done, be a doctor. If you were not brilliant at science, fantastic, be a dentist. And if you were rubbish at science, go and read law and be a solicitor. So that's just what you did. And so that's what I did. And I went to Oxford and I read law, and I still kind of was always writing kind of on the sly, but I certainly wasn't putting stuff out there in ouds or anything like that. So yeah, I just went and became a miserable solicitor. But I always loved television, I always loved writing, but I just had to take the misery as far as I could take it. I had to qualify, because I'm quite conservative by nature. So I worked for an entertainment law firm, and everyone in there had a secret passion. So it was such a depressing place. People who were like me, who loved something but just didn't have the bottle for whatever reason to go for it. But by the end of my training contract, I was like, right, that's it. It's now or never. So that's when I started writing. But I still hadn't discovered screenwriting, and then so fortuitously a friend won a copy of Final Draft, the software for screenwriters, in a film quiz, and she gave it to me. And at the time I had a part-time job at the BBC, like writing quiz shows and things like that. And while I was there, BBC Scotland Drama was looking for new drama. I started writing dialogue, and it was like, that's it, I found my thing. Because my prose wasn't up to much, so that was just, I had only just started writing, but that was definitely not going to be my thing. But somehow I could just hear how people spoke, and it just flowed easily. And then it won that BBC Scotland competition. It got me an agent, and then I think I was 27. So then that just got me started. So I was so slow to even try, and I just thought, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for me. And then, yeah, it did, and it did quickly, and I've just been writing ever since.
Spectacular. Now, talk me through the process of writing an original screenplay. How do you begin?
How I begin is, I don't begin until I can hear characters talking for themselves. So there's sort of 2 parts to screenwriting. In my feeling about it is, one is just pure structure, and you just don't get anywhere near that until you've got the voices. And for me, I can't ever feel that I'm making stuff up, because it just doesn't feel like real people. So once I know the characters well enough, I can feel, it sounds like a bit shanty, but I can just hear them talking. So it feels like, when I'm at the stage where it feels like I'm just transcribing a conversation I can hear, then I know that the idea is ready. So then I'll try and do the vomit draft, and it's just horrible and cringy, and you print it off and you're just so ashamed of what you've produced. But the longer I've been doing it, the more I can sort of feel what the rhythm of needs to be. So I just edit it, print it off. So I'm very slow, and it takes me a long time to make anything good, but that's my process. I transcribe characters, and then I just write it until it's good enough.
Writing is rewriting.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between doing an original screenplay and then adapting a book? Is your process
such
different?
a good question, because doing an original one, you've got the pressure of, well, this is hugely interesting to me, but might mean nothing to anyone else. So when I had the idea for Wild Rose about this Glaswegian girl who was just desperate to be a country singer. It was long before Taylor Swift or country became mainstream. So I would go out and pitch it, and by that point I'd only written 1 or 2 TV episodes. So I was there, nobody knew me, nobody was waiting for a film script about a country singer from Glasgow from somebody they'd never heard of. So that can infect you. You can be really passionate about an idea, but by the time you try to persuade people about it, it can seed something in you that makes you think, actually, maybe this is just such a minority interest, whatever. So I have to be if I'm going to pursue an original idea, I have to be obsessed with it. It needs to just lodge in me for years. Because it's such a commitment, because you are going to get people who make you feel like this is of no interest. So I only have, if I'm honest with myself, I only have an original idea that I feel that obsessional about every, like, say, 5 years, because the self-doubt knocks so much of them away, as it probably should. But ones like Wild Rose, nothing you can do about it. Even if you want to get rid of it, you can't. It's got to pass through you or something like that. And adaptation is quite different.
In what way?
Adaptation is, oh gosh, it depends. I've adapted somebody's blog for a BBC drama called The C Words with Sheridan Smith, and the difficulty in that was how do you dramatise a blog? How do you take a huge, massive material? And another challenge was the girl who wrote it, she had cancer, and her cancer came back while I was writing it. So just thinking about her feelings at all points in the process, that was the specific challenge of that. Adapting a book like David's, the challenges were, first of all, I love this book so much, I don't want to screw it up. Secondly, everyone loves this book so much, I don't want to screw it up. And thirdly, David himself is a real master adapter. I don't know if you've seen, probably have the Patrick Melrose adaptations.
Yes.
That, to me, that's one of the best examples of adaptation there is. So there were 3 ways of being intimidated by this project. So when I was approached about it, I also had a week-old baby at the time, so I wasn't planning to take on any work for a year. But it was that book, it meant everything to me. So I feel I'm probably running into more questions of yours, but I somehow can't stop talking because I still feel that passion for the book.
I want to talk about One Day because it's one of those rare books that just crosses, it has intergenerational appeal, but it must have put you under pressure because the audience has such strong preconceptions about it and how it should be. How did you manage to wrestle with that in your mind when you were bringing these iconic characters to life?
I think the thing that worried me the most at the beginning is how would young women relate to Emma? Is this a story that would mean anything to them? Would they see this wonderful young woman being obsessed over time with this ridiculous posho, and are young women just going to be like, girl, get a single therapy session and that will go, purge that idiot and get on with your life? I just thought maybe that is not a love story that is recognisable to younger women. Maybe that's not a young man that any young woman would fall in love with, and maybe that's not even a young woman that anybody would recognise. So I worried away about that for a while. But I think if I had to say what the one thing was that I just wanted to get right in this, it was to give people the feeling that I felt reading that book for the first time and that everyone felt. Like, what was that thing? Why did that book connect? Because sometimes you get offered an adaptation and you might take it because there's a theme that's interesting to you, or you've got something to say that you feel you can kind of launder through whatever the material is you've been given. But for this, it seemed to me to just be so much about what did that do to people and why, and just give them that feeling through television if you can.
Well, and you certainly did that. I've always wondered, at what point did you show your work to David Nichols? Because that must have been a really nerve-wracking moment.
Yeah, I mean, taking this job, I knew David just to say hello to, but it wasn't clear what the dynamic was going to be, and it could have been very intimidating. But luckily, as you know, if you know him, which I think you do, he's like the most gentle, awkward, modest, lovely person. So because I got to know him a little bit, I mean, it definitely was intimidating showing it to him, but first it would go to the producers and then they would give a bunch of notes. So he would see like a better version. He wouldn't be seeing the vomit draft, that's for sure. But also the dynamic was established early on that he wasn't like, there was no hierarchy with him. He was available, he was an executive producer, he was available and he gave brilliant notes, but I felt no pressure coming from him. So partly that's just him, that's his personality, but partly I think our relationship was managed really, really brilliantly by Rowana Ben and Jude Lignitsky, who were the producers. Because if you've got two awkward writers like bumping against each other, that could have been weird. But one of the chief joys of working on this was my relationship with him. He was a kind of a mentor. He was so generous, but not in any way interfering or pulling rank or anything.
So was there anything that you'd written or any scenes that you'd done that you were particularly nervous about showing him?
He does not like swearing, and I'm from Glasgow. So that is the thing that we probably disagreed about most. Also, there were lines in the first episode that he wanted rid of that I had written, and there was just no way I was letting go of them. But
can you give us?
Yeah, when he was trying to guess her accent, like that, and he was saying every northern town that he glanced at out the window on the train going up to Edinburgh. I really wanted to keep those lines in because my 3 years of going to university down here, people were constantly impersonating my accent and saying inane things like that. And I just thought it said a lot about class and about, it just felt so necessary. So, but, you know, he let me keep it in. It wasn't coming out. But we didn't have very many moments like that. And it was never tense. I think we've got quite similar tastes, actually.
And reading the book, with an expert eye, were there particular parts of it that you thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to dramatise this?
You know, it was just such a dream job in one particular respect, which is that because he is a screenwriter, his dialogue is amazing and he writes in quite a filmic way anyway. Often you'll be given material that has an interesting story, but the dialogue is horrible. Or there's a lot of, as my American agent calls it, it's a heavy lift. Do you know what I mean? This was not a heavy lift because so much of what you need for a good screenplay is already there in his book. But as always, the challenge in adapting a book is how do you get people's inner voice rendered on the screen, particularly if you've got a character like Dex, who might be kind of outwardly sort of quite idiotic at times, but is quite a deep-feeling person at times, and her, who can be quite prickly and pretentious and patronising, but in the book you get to know why. So how are you going to translate people's sort of inner lives onto the screen? And that's the kind of work that I love watching. And actually, when I accepted the job, we waited for a year because I had this 1-week-old baby, and in that time Normal People came out, and I was just horrified and devastated because it was brilliant and it was everything that I wanted to achieve for this novel in terms of turning characters inside out and really, really, truly understanding who they were and what effect they had on each other. So that was another thing to worry about.
So talking about the characters in One Day, Emma, fascinated by. Do you relate to her? Do you empathise with her? Were there parts of her that you could recognise in yourself?
Yes. How can you tell? I love that girl. When I read the book for the first time, I was in my late 20s, and I felt like she was me, and of course, like so did the rest of the world feel that was them, but it really was me. So I just loved her so much. I always thought she was one of the best female characters in fiction, and if there was one kind of emotional access point for me for this book, it was this girl. I know this girl, and I want to write this girl in detail, and quite a lot of, although the material was all there in the book, I think to adapt something well, it's so, I'm not saying that I've done it well, but I mean, if you convincingly, in terms of convincing yourself you're the right person to do it, you have to have that you have to feel like one of them is you, or you have to have an emotional connection that's so deep. And I really felt that and still feel that with Emma. And I know you'll probably come to the casting, but the one thing I did know was the casting of Emma is just everything.
Did you have any preconceptions about who you wanted to play Emma? Because you must have thought about that so much.
I think at the beginning, the conversation between us all was about, do we have to, does it have to be a name, a recognisable face? And sometimes if you're writing something like the broadcaster or the streamer like makes you cast someone like that, casting up as it's called so vulgarly. But in this, we all felt that it couldn't be somebody you recognise, and also we don't want to have somebody who's in their 30s and age them down. They had to have that dewy quality in episode 1 that makes you really believe that these people have their whole lives ahead of them, and they don't even know how young they are at that point. And so then it was a decision about, they need to be really young. And then, the casting director, Rachel Sheridan, she saw everyone in that age group, but we already knew about Ambika because we had seen This Is Gonna Hurt, and I don't know if you...
So you knew she was your...
Well, she was
Emma.
a candidate because she was so... I mean, as soon as I saw her in that, I don't know if you saw that BBC drama, the Adam Kay adaptation, as soon as I saw her in that playing Shruti, I was like, I've never seen you before, but you are mesmerising. She needs hardly any dialogue. It's just all off her face. She's got so much interior life. So I was fascinated by her, but she auditioned along with everybody else. And as she said in interviews, she initially didn't want to do it at all.
Why did she?
Because I think it was one of her favourite books. She's so young. She read when she was 13. She was born in the 90s. This is so crazy. So I think she was daunted by the prospect. And I think it took her a long time to think of herself as a romantic lead. But thank God she did it, because as soon as I saw her casting tape, it was like, this is everything I need. I feel like emotional talking about it, but it's like everything I need this character to be. Like because as well as being, she can also be Emma, the character, not Ambika. She can be annoying, anal, just tiresome, sarcastic. Remember, like back in the day, you couldn't say a straightforward word. You would have to be sort of ironic the whole time, just irritating. I needed somebody who could play all of that, but also could just devastate you with her face, because there's so much going on underneath. So we were all just obsessed with that girl.
And you just knew that was there was no one else that you would
there
have...
were a couple... We saw casting tapes, and at the beginning I was really fixated with somebody who was a northerner. But her northern accent was fantastic. She had a voice coach, but even now I find it hard to believe that she's not from Leeds. I can still hear that sort of cadence in her voice. So I think so. You make the decision about Ambika, but also then it's all about the chemistry.
Well, I was going to ask you, because then you've got to choose decks, and they've got to have this amazing chemistry. So how did you figure out what that alchemy would look like?
I mean, I figured out nothing. I've got no experience in casting. So they saw everyone, the casting director saw everyone, and we would get like a short list of tapes. But everyone saw Leo's and thought he was amazing. But White Lotus hadn't come out yet, so we didn't really know we didn't know anything about him. He'd been in one film, but his casting tape was kind of interesting and compelling, and we saw a lot of kind of Hugh Grant of your archetypes, do you know what I mean? And we just knew that kind of English posho generic, not Hugh Grant, but the kind of copyists. We just didn't want one of those people, because it's become so tired, and Leo just had something else about him. And then when we put them in the room together, something just happened, and it just happened. So we had like this sort of, there was just instant chemistry between the two of them.
And you felt like you had that real Emma and Dex connection immediately.
Yeah, but he would be coming in all bulked up and covered in tattoos because he was filming The White Lotus. So at times it was hard to imagine this guy being this very privileged, polished, posh guy. But I don't know, once we had them, I felt more confident that it was going to work, because if we didn't get the casting right, we didn't have a hope.
I have to say, from my perspective, it was impeccable, and they were mesmerising, both of them, to watch. One thing that I'm sure you've always been asked about One Day is, I don't think this is a spoiler alert because I think everyone knows how it ends. Were you ever tempted to give it a positive ending? Were you ever tempted to change that ending?
I felt like I should interrogate it. Like I should interrogate everything, and I should interrogate that as well to make sure that there wasn't a different outcome that would chime more with the audience now that we were a bit further along. But I'm glad I went through that process. I think it was a good thing to do. I wanted to because one of the worries, this is how I go into every project, I like this list of worries, one of the worries was just the fact that she is lost in the end mean this is ultimately his story? And is that problematic for the young female audience? I was constantly having this ticker tape of anxiety of how I could mess this up. But actually, if you take that, like so much of the meaning of the entire piece comes from that, because it's like a single coherent structure, and you can't just go in and sort of dismantle it and substitute something else. If I had something better that would give people the feeling that you leave the book feeling, then maybe. But I didn't have that, so I felt I could stand by that ending.
And you did it beautifully. But I'm interested to know, like in your head, what would your alternative ending be?
They were rubbish. I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I did have a few just rubbishy ideas. But they were just so rubbish.
But in my head, I want another world where Emma and Dex live happily ever after, and she gets pregnant, and they have children, and I just were you tempted to go down that route?
I mean, I tried to think about a whole bunch of alternatives, but I certainly didn't write any scenes. I didn't really get past just writing one line on Microsoft Word for options. It I kind of knew it was more of an exercise rather than anything that I really was going to try and build out into scenes. Yeah.
So I want to talk about your work more generally, because you've done so much more than One Day, and I hope you'll continue to do much more. Is there a particular scene or some dialogue that you've written that you're most proud of, that you look back on and think, God, I really nailed that?
My goodness. Gosh, such an interesting question. I wish that I thought about it in advance. I think I love it when people are in something of mine and they don't need any dialogue. So there's a line in One Day where she says, I don't want to be a footnote. And you're meant to be able, if I'd done my job correctly, you're meant to look at Dexter in the 14th episode after that, the memory of her saying that to him, and you're meant to supply the words yourself. She wasn't a footnote, she was his whole life, and you're meant to know that that's what he's feeling in the moment. But obviously, if I'd written that as a piece of dialogue, I'm not going to lie, I did in the first draft write it as a piece of dialogue. I mean, it's a hideous piece of dialogue. No, it's not a piece of human speech, right? And it's certainly who would be saying it to. He's alone on the hill at that point, but. That is what I find most satisfying as a viewer, watching other people's things, where you feel the feeling without it being supplied to you through dialogue. And if at times I've been working with actors who are just so experienced and so amazing, it's just all about what they can play on their face. So when I was writing Three Girls, there's a two-hander, quite a long scene between Leslie Sharp and Maxine Peake, and it's almost, there's so much information in the scene which can sometimes just be a nightmare, but just watching how they relate to each other with their faces and bodies in between the dialogue, I feel happy when something's working on that level. Yeah.
So the life of a writer is very solitary, and I'm just trying to kind of imagine how you work. I've been lucky enough once to be in a writer's room, and it was the best fun I've ever had. What do you do? Do you sit alone and think about what you're going to write, and then do you go into the writer's room and exchange ideas? How does it work?
Will you tell us about about the writers' room you were in?
It was literally one writers' room, and it was amazing. And then I never got invited back. So I want to know.
What did you?
Well, it was about the Mistresses of Cliveden, my first book, and I was invited in to talk about what my characters were like, and they had pictures of all of the women I'd written about all over the walls, and I had to talk about their character traits, and it was just so amazing. So it was like kind of talking about really old friends who you've loved forever, and actually having a captive audience. But what is it like for can you set the scene for us in a writer's room?
I mean, I would say that we didn't really have a writer's room for one day. We hired other writers to write individual episodes, and we started this during the pandemic. So we had some Zoom calls with me and the other 3 writers. But I feel like I have been in a writer's room in LA, but I feel like writer's rooms works really well where you've got to break story, especially if it's something procedural. But for something like this, I felt like it sort of needs to feel like it comes from one voice, or like one, like so cheesy, but like one soul, do you know what I mean? So it wasn't like, I didn't find it necessary to have a writer's room because the story was all there. We weren't breaking story, but we did get together and just talk about some of the experiences in the book, and some of us had been through some of those experiences, and that was just very helpful and also just very nice, talking about what you were saying about the solitude. So I can't say I really had a writer's room on this, but as a result of those like couple of days, Anna Jordan, who wrote the episode where Dex's mother is really ill. Anna had very sadly had that experience with her own mother, and she brought so much to that episode because of that. And so no, we didn't really have a writer's room. I was stuck with these characters and they were stuck with me for 3 years. I wrote most of the episodes myself, but I did have sort of people to bounce things off when I needed them. So I had a script editor, Saskia Abbott, who's just completely wonderful. David was just a great friend throughout the whole process. If I couldn't get a joke right or something, I could just ask him about it. And people don't leave you on your own for too long because there's 14 episodes and there's always someone jabbing you for something that you owe them. So yeah, at most I would be a couple of weeks by myself writing, and then somebody's asking for something or on this or that or this.
So it's a collaborative process.
So collaborative, yeah.
And all of the people have to fit together.
Yeah, that's what I love about television. Yeah. I mean, all these like novel writers here and non-fiction writers, how you take yourselves off and just write from beginning to end with nobody giving you a little pat on days where you're wondering whether anyone's going to be interested in the subject, or when you're just sick of yourself and you're sick of the material, who's going to give you that fresh air again so it's not stale? I just so value the relationships that you have in television, and some writers hate that and they feel meddled with, but I tend to work with the same people over and over again, and they bring so much to the process, and I feel like I've been in a kind of long conversation with David really over these last years, and that's been so enriching. Yeah.
You're really selling it to me, because writing a book is such a solitary process, and being able to be accountable to people, to discuss it with people, that just sounds like the dream. What apart from one day, do you have books that you would absolutely love to have a go at and try to adapt? Are there particular ones that are really on your list of must-dos?
I don't think so. There's one book that I wish that someone had adapted, Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld, and lots of brilliant people have tried to adapt it, but it's never made it to screen. And there's another book by Meg Wolitzer called The Interestings, and similarly people have tried to adapt that. It even made it to an Amazon pilot, but it just wasn't successful. So I feel that those two really deserve great adaptations, although The Interestings is going to be made into a musical. But at the moment I'm adapting my own film, Wild Rose, as a musical.
As a musical?
Yeah. So David always says adapting your own work is a bit like cutting your own hair, i.e. highly ill-advised. But I'm doing it anyway. So that's the next thing.
And how's it going to work as a musical? I mean, I'm hoping you're not an incredibly talented musician as well as everything else, because I don't think I could deal with it. So how is it?
It's being directed by John Tiffany, who did Black Watch and the Harry Potter plays in the West End and Broadway. So he really knows what he's doing. I've never written so much as a student play, so I'm enjoying learning from him. But the music is American country music. It's not like original written music, apart from the final song. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, when is that? When should we expect that to come out?
That is starting in Edinburgh at the Lyceum in March. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to One Day a little bit, I mean, one of the things that I loved so much of it was the details, the hamburger phone and the music in the background. And how did you come to think of finessing all these tiny details that just made it so nostalgic to someone of my generation? Like I'd really step back in time.
I'm so glad you felt that way. I feel like we had the best art director, the best music supervisor, and I think the brief was so... when I originally pitched this to Netflix, I said this quite pretentious thing, but I really was trying to explain something, which is I want you to watch it and get this kind of Proustian rush of recognition, which you don't get from like the top most popular songs that were around in 1988. You get from the tiny wee things that you'd completely forgotten about, like how in student flats people hang their underwear in the kitchen, and like the tiny wee details. So we steered away from the most obvious music and the most obvious set design at every point, because then it's just a kind of a memory of a memory of a memory. It's not real. So I just wanted those tiny wee touches. So Patrick Rolfe, who was the art director, he was around. He went to university at that time. So as well as being very talented, he felt such a personal connection to the material. So he made it his business to just get everything so authentic. And the music, David had a lot to do with the music as well, because he's a real muso. And we talked about, and also with the clothing, it's like people don't just wear the fashions of that year, and they don't just listen to the music of that year. So we had to feel authentic in that way, which is the greatest hits of 1988, whatever. We just had to, that way of doing kind of recent period drama, we just did not want to do. So I think hopefully we didn't.
Who got to keep the burger phone?
Oh, who got to keep the burger phone? I must find out. Not me.
Yeah. You should have done that. So, so a difficult question. Obviously, one of the themes of One Day is class. Emma and Dex are from very different classes, and in the casting, you've now got the question of race as well. Was that something that was intentional? How did that come about?
It wasn't intentional, but it's definitely something we thought about a lot. Excuse me. Once we'd cast Ambika, and for me the question was, Ambika and I together kind of did a lot of research into South Asian women who were at British universities at that time. So we talked to loads of women to hear their experiences of what it was like in 1988 to go to university as a South Asian woman. And I had a few real, usually, I don't know how to express it, but like, you want to know everything about a character's hinterland. Whether you see that on screen or not, you need to know everything there is about that person. So I feel like we did all that work together. But by the time it came to actually writing the scripts, there was no way I was going to introduce a storyline about her South Asian heritage and what it meant to be at university, and her building things in about her relationship with her family that weren't there in the book. Because, and it's not, it's like the way what I was talking about with the ending. Like, I questioned everything. I questioned whether I should be doing that or whether someone should be doing that. I questioned a lot, to what degree should Ambika's South Asianness inform the character, and that would take the story off in different directions. But having asked those questions, I felt satisfied. No, that's not what the book's about. It's not my place to write that story. And furthermore, does that mean if you have to do these things, if that's the law of writing and in the culture that's what's expected, okay then, does that mean we can't cast Ambika? And that just was never going to happen. So we had all the thoughts, all the worries. Ambika and I did this research. We had Dex ask the question in the first episode, is it a religious thing? Because it's a reasonable question for the audience to be asking, so it should be dealt with for sure. But after that, I felt, right, we can relax now. This is your romantic lead. This is the Emma there was. And there was just no way she was not getting the part because I was worried about not building in a story about what it meant to be in a mixed race relationship. No, I just talked myself around the houses and back again. And we knew we might get some, who knows what people will say, there's all the things to worry about, but actually one of the most joyful things in the response to One Day is, like the very first review that came out was Chitra Ramaswamy's in The Guardian, and she said how meaningful it was to her to see a romantic lead played by a South Asian girl. And she said, I was at university in Edinburgh in 1988 or in Glasgow, and that would never have happened. Dex would never have gone for a girl like me. So it's not authentic in that respect, but it's emotionally authentic, and it feels bloody amazing to see myself as a young woman on screen. So, it's great. And ultimately, Ambika killed it. She utterly killed it. There's no more Emma, the Emma-ness of Emma, the thing that drew me to this book years ago and drew me back to it and kept me on it for 3 years is that character. And I feel like we just got so lucky with Ambika.
But all of the cast members really drew out. I mean, I found with Sylvie, I really related to her so much. In the TV show, I really identified with her, and I felt like her story was so progressed. I mean, do you want to just
You're
explain?
so right. I'm so glad you noticed that, because in the story, in the book, I love the character of Sylvie. She's hilarious, but she's quite one.
Do you want to just explain?
Sylvie is the kind of very sort of posh woman that Dexter marries quite late in the day and has a child with. And in the TV series, she's played by Eleanor Tomlinson, who brought a real warmth and humanity to a character who was kind of funny, but like brittle and like awful.
And cold.
In the book. And you really needed that for drama, because for that episode that they're getting together, the audience needs to buy into this relationship as being a positive thing for Dexter. If she's just like a joke, and we know that she's bad news from the get-go, there's nothing to invest in that episode. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's some of the work of adaptation. She was the perfect character in One Day because it's so enjoyable to read about her in a book, but it's just not going to be engaging when you're watching half an hour.
No, I mean, that was one of the things that struck me most, because, obviously, in the book it's about Emma and Dex, and actually in the TV show I really started thinking about Sylvie and what it must have felt for her and her perspective and her relationship with Emma, and that was really, really beautifully done. But in order to write as beautifully as you do, you must read prolifically. You must really not stop. What are the most formative books that you've read? What are the books that have really shaped who you are as a writer?
My goodness. I think, gosh, do you know, Prep that I just mentioned, The Interestings, Truly One Day. I'm just reading all the time. That's how I relax, and that's what I'm doing when everyone is watching TV in the evening. That feels like work to me. So I'm not watching box set anything. I'm just reading the whole time. But because I'm here and talking to you in public, my mind has gone so blank. It's like I've never picked up a book. So I might have to pop back to that question.
What are you reading at the moment?
I am reading a new Glaswegian novel. about you have to come back to me truly is as if I've never read a book. I'll come back to that question.
So, and in terms of TV shows, I mean, I know that's work for you, but what work of cinema or television do you really hold up as your inspiration, that you feel like they've really nailed the characters and managed to get the emotions really perfectly pitched?
Three things. Bob and Rose. Does anyone remember Bob and Rose? Written by Russell T Davies, starring Leslie Sharp and Alan Davies, about a gay man who falls in love with a woman. And oh my God, as a piece of screenwriting, it's just so amazing. I think you can only get it on DVD. So Bob and Rose, one of the best British dramas ever. Transparent. Do you remember Transparent, the first Amazon original? I think it's just a perfect family drama, and I just love Transparent, and I aspire to that level of work that's in Transparent. And recently I've loved Fleischman. I like things that are experimental with form.
Like that?
Yeah, did you like that?
Yeah, I did.
Cracking on. Recent books, I really like that Andrew Hagen book, The Caledonian Road.
Oh my!
I thought that was incredible, and I love Taffy Brodesser Agner. I love her most recent one, Long Island Compromises.
Yeah. By the way, I want them both to come next year. So,
oh my goodness.
So maybe you can be in conversation with them, and maybe we can talk
audacious.
About doing something. Yeah,
yeah. I think she's so audacious. So I loved Fleischman. Transparent, Bob and Rose, and Fleischman. Those are my three that I adore and go back to and go back to and go back to. But I really adore Sally Wainwright, of course, and Russell T Davies, of course. Yeah.
And who would you most like to work with now? You've done David Nicholls, who is about one of the most famous writers of our generation. Who is on your list of people you'd really like to collaborate with?
My goodness. This is the third mention of Leslie Sharp in this talk, but I really love Leslie Sharp and I really want to write another part for her. I love writing things for people. I really want to write something for Penelope Wilton, who is getting on. I think she's maybe nearly 80, but the next thing I write is going to be for an actress of that age. So I'm excited for that. But I suppose going back to the collaborative nature of screenwriting, I just really love working with the same people, because ever since I started, there's always been someone who has sort of been a kind of mentor role, usually a kind of older woman, who have always seen something in me that I don't necessarily see in myself. And on those days where you bottle it and you don't believe in the idea anymore, or that connection to the characters talking, you don't have it, I just need that person to sort of go through that with me, let me step away and then step back to it. And it's more important than anything to have that person. And there's a woman called Sue Hogg, and then she's retired now, Rowana and Jude, and then the script editor Saskia Abbott. Like, if you can just find that one person at any given time, you can just do so much more than what you could do on your own. I mean, I love Jessie Buckley just as a person as well as an actor.
She's
so
phenomenal.
I'd love to write more for her. I think, I don't know, I just feel it's so nice to come off a project as massive as this and to be at the beginning of things. And I feel so open to new relationships with the actors and new stories, and kind of have my brain back. Lots of writers, like screenwriters, write on multiple things at once, but I cannot do that because it takes me so long to make things good. So I've just been with those guys for 3 years. So just being right back at the beginning again, it's just such a relief. It's so nice. I feel like I'm so cheesy, but like falling back in love with writing, and it all feels like dead pure. It won't for a while, it won't for too long, but at the moment it's so nice to just be back at the
Do you
start.
make sure, though, as a practice, you write every day?
No way.
No, really? Okay, so a lot of the writers I speak to, if you want to be a good writer, you've got to write every day.
I avoid it like the plague. No.
This is making me feel so much. Has someone told you to say all this? Because it's making me feel so much better.
I'd love to be that person. And
Me too.
I've got young children, so that ain't going to happen. But I can't use them as an excuse, because even if I didn't have them, I still wouldn't write every day. I think that's one of the tricky things about being a screenwriter, because you're always writing to deadline, and there's always people kicking you up the arse if you haven't delivered. So unless I have that, I can't write at all. I just can't. So right now, even though I'm not in production, I have to hand in pages every Friday to my script editor, Saskia. Otherwise, I'll just be walking around Westfield listening to music. So nothing will happen. And I can, like, committing to something, I don't know about you, but if you are in the practice of revising and revising and revising, you can revise forever. And I can print it out and I can write different versions in different coloured pens. And I wasn't like this as a schoolgirl. I would do my homework on the day that I was set it. But now, having been a screenwriter for all these years and working to deadline, unless there are actors standing around in 12 hours with nothing to say, I can't get about in my business and do it. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration. But no, I don't write every day. And I feel like that's, I mean, I do when I've got a deadline, but I don't know, back to the idea of people talking in your head, like, if I can't hear them talking, I'm just going to be writing just total shit. So I'm just not going to do it. And yeah, so I feel like people should liberate themselves and not feel like they have to write every day. Well, I don't know, everyone's process is different, but no, I can't imagine writing every day.
What advice, I'll open up to questions in a minute, I'll stop monopolising you, but what advice would you give to an aspiring screenwriter now? How would you, what would you say to them that they should do? 'Cause it's such a difficult industry to get into. What career advice would you give that person?
In one way, I feel like it's easier to break in now because more television is being made and you know more about it. You can find out how to get into this world more easily. But on the other hand, it feels more difficult because it was quite an obscure thing to want to do like 15 years ago, whereas now kind of everyone wants to do it. I feel like I've got particular sympathy with the Emma type person, the kind of outsider kind of person who is not the most confident, who doesn't think they've got something to say. Like I feel like I'm really banging this drum heavily, but when I was at university, any kind of thought that I might have had about writing plays or something, I was surrounded by such confident people. And I'm not necessarily talking about the difference in social class, but just cultural class, who really felt like, yeah, I'm going to be the person who gets these jobs and who, writes these plays and everything. And I remember sitting at a dinner at Oxford next to this guy, Leon. He said, only me and my friend Alistair understand the meaning of irony. And he had a multiplex ticket, and he didn't have to get a job once we got to London. He'd have a piano lesson in the morning, then he'd go to the cinema in the afternoon. That guy's written nothing.
Yeah, where is he now? Where is he now?
Yeah,
is he an accountant?
No, I don't know what's happened to him. I think he works in the family business or something. But I find those people so intimidating. So I'm obsessed with helping people who would otherwise count themselves out. And I'm not saying that it's not a class comment. I'm not saying like the Leons in the world don't have something to say. But I am particularly interested in people who are not pushing themselves forward. Usually that's young women, but not only. So just to tell a wee story about something that happened on one day. When we were in the edit forever, because it takes so long to find the tone. Like it was scary when you see what you shot, because it's so hard to imagine the first million versions of the first episode, which is so awful because it takes so long to find the pace and the tone. Anyway, early on, I knew that it just needed a few more jokes. It just needed 3 more jokes. And I don't know if you know what ADR is, additional dialogue recording. Sometimes you can record dialogue and put it in the episode on the back of people's heads, or if there's a crowd scene, so wherever you need more information or a joke or something where you're not seeing people's lips move, you can put additional dialogue. If you do too much of it, like the audience just checks out, they know something's weird, but there's a sort of optimal amount that can really elevate the material either with humour or with information, whatever. So at the end, the first episode was nearly there, but just needed a few more jokes, and I just looked around at the writers, and I'd never hired anyone before, so I just hired people whose writing I liked. I didn't realise you're meant to hire people who've got skills that you don't have. I'm not a comedy writer, so I'm looking at and David's a super funny guy, but the kind of jokes that we needed, I knew were kind of needed to be written by someone younger and someone female, so I wasn't funny enough and he wasn't a young woman. So I had seen this woman on Twitter, like when I was in 20 years ago, she's called Molly Goodfellow, and just a random woman, not professional. She was writing jokes. She was the funniest woman. And I messaged her years ago before one day, just chatting to her. She was like this young woman who hadn't gone to university, lived somewhere in the countryside, and we just kind of kept in touch. And I just had this brainwave when I watched that first episode. I was like, Molly Goodfellow needs to come in and write a few jokes for this episode. So I'd never met her. I told Roanna and Jude, and they were like, okay, let's go with this. So she came in, and she was divine. She was adorable. She was just like Emma, like really unconfident, quite quiet and shy. And but we got started. She was amazing. So she wrote ADR for about maybe 4 or 5 episodes. And at the time she was working the night shift in Waitrose or something. And she did such a good job. She was such a pleasure to work with. And she now has a book agent and she has a film and television agent. And now that is exactly the kind of person whose work I want to see, I already enjoy, and who's not putting themselves forward, who's not the person at the front getting a BBC pilot, whatever. So I'm just obsessed with those people, and if I get the opportunity to push them forward in any way, then I will. But that wasn't my motivation with Molly. I just needed episode 1 to be like 30% funnier. She made it 50% funnier.
And you nailed it.
So that was great with her.
So, oh gosh, I've been talking to you too long, and I now need to open up the floor. I'm sure everyone's got lots of questions. So, who wants to ask Nicole something? Yeah, hi.
You obviously...
Do you need a microphone?
You obviously invest so much into work, and you said it took 3 years for this. You had some control over casting or input casting. Thank you. As I was saying, you obviously invested so much time and yourself into this, and you had some control over the casting and obviously then in edit as well. At some point, obviously, you had to hand over your baby, and that was obviously to the director. And did you go on set? Obviously, you probably did set visit, but, how did you feel about someone else then taking on your interpretation of your script?
Oh, that's such a good question. So Molly, there were 4 different directors actually, because there was so much of it, we needed to break it down into blocks. And the lead director is a woman called Molly Manners, and she'd done some gorgeous work in a BBC show called In My Skin. So I knew that she knew how to do what we were trying to do, which is turn a character sort of inside out. So I felt so confident about her. Also, she's hilarious. So from the get-go, I loved her and I knew she was the right person for the job. In terms of going to set, I had so much to write that I wasn't able to go that often. So I had an assistant script editor who went every day on my behalf, which was amazing, to make sure that they're saying the words in the scene, which makes me sound like very control freakish, but it's so stressful when you don't at least have one take of what you've written. It's just no, I feel like if you feel confident in the people that are working with you, and I had 100% confidence in Molly, then I didn't worry. I just felt lucky that we'd managed to get her. And saying that, seeing some of the rushes, it's weird because it's refracted through another brain. So when I first saw it, it was much more colourful than I was expecting. And I was like, oh my God, it's like fluorescent. It's just, I don't want it to be like bland global content, look like everything else on Netflix. It's so lurid. It doesn't feel naturalistic. So there's always things to worry about when you see someone else's vision and it doesn't totally meet up with your own. But that's why it's so great to work with people you trust, because then I could say that to Roanna and Jude, and then we could talk it through. And because I'm not always right, like so far from always right. And Molly, I think, is so responsible. Her and only her is responsible for how modern it feels. Like, I would be quite happy to have 2 people, and in the first draft of episode 1, this was the episode, 2 people talking in a room. No ball, no colour, just 2 people talking in a room. And I did hand that into Netflix, and they handed it straight back to me. It's like a piece of pub theatre, no thanks. Like, this needs to have scale. And I don't think in terms of scale, I just think in terms of how these people are feeling at every second and sort of rendering that on screen. But there's more to an enjoyable TV experience than that. And Molly understood that, so she brought scale and colour and so much. And it was wonderful working with her in the post-production period, because we were apart most of the time during filming. And then we ended up working really close together during post, and that was yet another very pleasurable thing about this job.
Hi. Hello. I've got a question. You said you can hear dialogue, and that's how you write. Can you teach to write good dialogue? Can you teach people, or is it inherent?
Such a good question. I don't know. I've never tried to teach people to do it. I really don't know. I know that actors are usually good writers because they know just instinctively whether something sounds like a human or not. I'd like to think you could teach it, but then again, you must be. What do you think? Do you think you could teach it?
I'm learning.
Of course you can teach it. Get your head down, work hard. Yeah, you must be able to. But I think it would be more, the lesson would be more in, if a person wants to be a screenwriter, they must have some affinity with dialogue. They must enjoy writing how people speak. So it will be more about learning about, trusting that in themselves. I mean, I've learned a lot about dialogue. I used to write dialogue more like prose. In my early work, people would talk in big chunky paragraphs of kind of embroidered prose, which is not like what people sound like. So over my years of working, I've slashed it down and down and down. So yes, you can learn it for sure.
I love your change in career. So basically, just from miserable lawyer to writer. How would you inspire someone to have a complete career change? What would you say to them, regardless of what they wanted to do, to have such a dramatic change?
I mean, my method was just make yourself so miserable by pushing this thing that you loathe to the bitter end. Do a degree? No, that's not enough. Go to law school? No, that's not enough. Do a training contract? That's enough. Really, I don't recommend that. But, I mean, I feel like people come of age at different times, and I would not have been ready to pursue this a day earlier. And when I first started, I was 27, so I'd missed the cut-off for the Royal Court Young Writers Programme, and everybody that I was going for jobs up against, they all knew each other, and they'd all trained to be playwrights, and they were so fancy, and I felt so intimidated, and blah, blah, blah. So what? You get there when you get there, and also, if you're not... I mean, back to an earlier question which links with this about what I'd say to young people trying to break through, or not young people. You definitely don't have to be young. It's just don't be a dick about it. It is honestly, it sounds cheesy, but it's such a privilege to get to do this. And it is a collaborative medium. You don't always have all the answers, and just kind of listen and be respectful and be prepared to do boring shit first. To learn, and that is a hard lesson. It's a hard lesson for me. It's an even harder lesson for people who are in their 20s. But if you can just be pleasant, make yourself useful, take an interest in other people, and just be open to whatever experiences whatever insight the most banal experiences can offer you, just be open. That's all. Just be open, I would say. And it's never too late. It's never too late. Yeah.
Love that. Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah, so how'd you get from the screenplay that you wrote? Was it not as granular? Did you sell that to Netflix? How'd you get from that to the script, the episodic scripts? Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. Yeah, they just hired, the production company acquired the rights in the book. They hired me to adapt it. So they put together a package of me adapting this book. We went and had a chat with Netflix and said, this is how we want to do it. We want to do 1 episode per year of the story or thereabouts. And then Netflix said, great, we'll greenlight it, which means, yes, we will make it. But sometimes that's kind of unusual that they'll greenlight something so quickly. That only happened because it was such a well-known book. Usually it's I want to write a thing about this, and they're like, okay, maybe write the first episode so we can see if we like it, and then we might order another episode, or we might then greenlight it to series. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, we've got time for, I think, 2 more questions.
it's very interesting what you were saying about, living with the characters, to let them sort of almost take over your mind and your emotions and your body, and to sort of birth them in a way, to go through the process of sort of gestation and labor, and then setting them free to go and have a life on their own. So how do you detox from Emma Index? And do you need much time to, let's say, give space between, one project that you're fully committed to and just fully, let's say, marinated in, and then for you to move on to the next one? Do you need to take time off, or you've just learned to kind of disassociate from that?
I love that question, because if there's one thing that this experience taught me, was just how much I need a break between projects. Like, it was so intense, and that total immersion in that material, and only that material over a long period of time. I just had no desire to write for so long, because even after I'd written the scripts, writing ADR for each episode over and over and over again. It's not that there's a lot of ADR, but you can either make the episode 100 times better, or you can completely balls it up. So, and you're watching, as I was an exec as well, so I'm watching the episodes. I haven't been able to watch it on Netflix. I don't think I'll ever be able to watch it, because I've seen every episode 3 billion times. So, when everyone was like, oh, it's a water cooler moment, I can't remember what's going on in the episodes, because I just can't go near them. So yeah, it is like having the same dinner every day for 3 years. I just can't go near chicken nuggets ever, 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 ever again. So yeah, I have like really idled my way through. It finished filming at the end of last January. I finished like proper work on it last September, and I haven't truly had the appetite to write new stuff, and I certainly haven't taken on any books that people have sent me and that sort of stuff. So I felt I've had to just go a bit quiet, and it's taken a long time to get my brain back. Yeah, it's been really intense. And Molly, the director, she feels the same as well.
So on that note, we've sadly run out of time, but Nicole Taylor, thank you for your candour, your humour, and just keep writing, because you're making everyone's lives better by what you do. So thank you very, very much.